Imagine this. You're sitting at home, minding your own business, when suddenly your homeowner EUS association decides that the sheriff EUN truck parked in your own driveway is a crime worth calling the cops over. But here it is as the kicker. The officer who shows up to enforce their petty complaint isn't just any cop. He's the sheriff's own son, fresh on the job, eager to prove himself, and ready to remind the HOA what real authority actually looks like. If you've ever wanted to see arrogance flip instantly into humiliation, stay with me, because this is one of those stories that makes you believe in karma. The story takes place in a tidy suburban neighborhood in California, the kind of place where everything looks perfect on the outside. Rows of two-story homes, cars polished until they glisten under the sun, lawns trimmed so neatly they could have been cut with scissors. On paper, it was idyllic. But if you've ever lived in an HOA-controlled community, you already know that perfection comes with a price, and that price is often paid in sanity. HOAs are notorious for their obsession with rules, and this particular board seemed to thrive on nitpicking every resident into submission. Our main character, let's call him Mike, wasn't the type to go looking for trouble. He'd lived in the neighborhood for years, paid his dues, kept his home looking good, and minded his own business. What set him apart from the rest of the residents, though, was his job. Mike wasn't just a working man. He was the county sheriff. His truck, the same one the HOA hated so much, wasn't just a vehicle. It was his mobile office, a symbol of service and often the first line of defense when emergencies erupted. To him, parking it in his driveway was as natural as anyone else parking their family SUV or minivan. But the HOA didn't see it that way. To them, Mike's official sheriff's truck was an eyesore. It broke some obscure clause buried deep in their community guidelines about commercial vehicles not being allowed in driveways. Never mind that it wasn't a plumbing van, a construction truck, or some rusty clunker leaking oil on the asphalt. This was a county-issued law enforcement vehicle, but the board didn't care. They saw it, they hated it, and they wanted it gone. At first, the HOA tried the usual passive-aggressive tactics. Mike would come home from long, grueling shifts and find notes taped to his windshield. The first one was worded like a friendly reminder. Please be advised, commercial vehicles must not be parked in driveways overnight. He chuckled, shook his head, and tossed it in the trash. He thought maybe they didn't realize it was his official work truck. But then another note came. This one bolder. This is your second warning. Failure to comply will result in fines. Mike sighed. He'd dealt with hardened criminals, violent confrontations, and high-stress investigations. A couple of HOA busybodies with too much free time on their hands didn't scare him. Still, he tried to keep the peace. He attended a board meeting, explained that this wasn't just some side business truck. This was his official sheriff's vehicle, issued by the county and required to be accessible in case of emergencies. Most rational people would have nodded, said thank you for your service, and dropped the issue. But not this HOA. If anything, his explanation seemed to make them dig their heels in deeper. Week after week, the threats escalated. The HOA sent letters with official letterheads, warning of fines and legal action. Mike remained calm, knowing he was well within his rights. California law even had specific exemptions protecting law enforcement vehicles from these kinds of HOA restrictions. But the board wasn't listening. They were convinced that rules were rules, and they were the ultimate authority in the neighborhood. And then came the day that flipped everything upside down. It was a sunny afternoon. Mike had just gotten home after a long shift and parked his truck in the driveway like always. He barely had time to hang up his uniform when there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find not one, but 2 police officers standing on his porch. For a moment, Mike thought maybe there had been an emergency nearby. But when he asked what was going on, one of the officers awkwardly explained, "We got a call about a vehicle violation. Someone reported a commercial truck parked in a driveway in violation of HOA rules." Mike blinked, incredulous. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. But as his eyes shifted to the younger of the two officers, his shock turned into something else. He recognized him. The rookie cop standing nervously at the edge of the porch was none other than his own son, Daniel. Fresh out of the academy, riding along for his early training shifts, shadowing his senior partner. The look on Daniel's face was priceless. Equal parts embarrassment, amusement, and determination. He glanced at his father, then at the sheriff's truck parked in the driveway, then back at his partner, as if silently asking, "Are we really doing this?" Mike kept his composure, though inside he was fuming. The HOA had actually called the cops on the county sheriff for parking his official vehicle at his own home. It was laughable and insulting all at once. But rather than explode, he decided to let the situation play out. He crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Well, officers," he said calmly, "why don't you go ahead and take a look?" The senior officer walked over to the truck, inspected it like he was doing his due diligence, then returned with a sheepish shrug. "This is a county-issued vehicle. There's nothing illegal about it being here. Whoever called this in wasted our time." Daniel, trying hard not to smirk, added, "Actually, Sheriff, the complaint specifically said the vehicle was a violation of HOA bylaws. But last I checked, HOA rules don't override state law. So, technically, the call was baseless." Mike raised an eyebrow, suppressing a grin. He could see his son was enjoying this a little too much. But he let him continue. Daniel straightened up, puffed out his chest, and said to his partner, "I think we should file this as a false report." The senior officer chuckled. "Yeah, let's do that. And maybe have a little chat with whoever keeps calling in nonsense like this." And that's when the real fun began. The officers walked right over to the HOA president's house, which was just a few doors down. Mike watched from his porch as his son knocked firmly on the door. Out stepped the HOA president, a middle-aged man in khakis and a polo shirt, the kind of guy who lived for his little bit of neighborhood power. He looked smug at first, assuming the cops were there to back him up. But that smugness vanished fast. The officers explained that calling the police over an HOA dispute was an abuse of emergency services, and if he did it again, he could face charges for filing false reports. Daniel's tone was professional, but Mike could see the spark of pride in his son's eyes as he laid down the law, literally, to the man who had made his father's life miserable for months. The HOA president stammered, tried to argue, but Daniel didn't budge. He repeated the warning, made it clear that law enforcement had better things to do than babysit neighborhood parking disputes, and left the man standing there red-faced and humiliated. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Residents whispered about how the HOA had finally been put in its place, not just by the sheriff himself, but by his own rookie cop son. The board backed off after that, the threatening letters stopped, and Mike was never bothered about his truck again. For Mike, the satisfaction wasn't just in winning the argument. It was in watching his son stand tall, use his training, and deliver justice with professionalism and authority. It was the perfect twist of fate. The HOA thought they could use the police to bully him, but instead, they got schooled by the very family they tried to mess with. Looking back, Mike admitted there was a certain poetry to it. The HOA believed they were the top dogs of the neighborhood, but in the end, they learned the hard way that real authority doesn't come from a clipboard and a set of arbitrary rules. It comes from upholding actual law, protecting people, and knowing when enough is enough. And honestly, there's something deeply satisfying about watching arrogance crumble in real time. The HOA thought they could flex their power, but instead they exposed their own pettiness to the entire community. Sometimes justice doesn't come in the form of courtrooms or long battles. Sometimes it arrives in a sheriff's uniform with a rookie cop at his side, knocking on your door to tell you you're the problem. So, the next time you hear about an HOA trying to push people around, just remember this story. Sometimes karma doesn't take years to arrive. Sometimes it parks right in the driveway, flips the script, and leaves the bullies red-faced in front of their neighbors. And if this story gave you chills, smash that like button, drop a comment about the most ridiculous HOA rule you've ever heard of. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice served exactly where it is deserved. Because trust me, this one was just the beginning.